Dear listeners, I ask you to listen to the story until the very end and be sure to write a review about what you liked and what needs to be changed to make it more interesting for you to listen to my stories. Backseat. I always hated working the night shift, but the bills don't pay themselves. Midnight had just passed, and the city was at that eerie in-between, too late for the drunk crowds, too early for the early risers. The streets were slick from an evening drizzle, reflecting the dull orange of the streetlights, stretching them into long, wavy ghosts. My cab smelled of old upholstery, stale coffee, and the faint trace of whatever cheap air freshener the company used. I was dead tired, my eyelids heavy, my mind wandering, counting the hours until I could park this damn car and stumble into bed. Then I got the ride request. No name, just a pin dropped near the outskirts of town, where the streetlights became sparse and the silence felt thicker. The kind of area where the houses had peeling paint and chain-link fences with rusty holes, where the sidewalk cracked under the weight of time and neglect. I sighed, rolled my shoulders, and tapped accept. It was either that or go home short on cash. When I pulled up, the street was empty, just rows of dark houses with curtained windows, the occasional flicker of a TV behind one. No one stood outside. I checked the app again, right location. Maybe they were inside, fumbling with their keys, or trying to sneak out without waking someone. I drummed my fingers on the wheel, debating if I should just cancel, but then, out of nowhere, the back door creaked open. I didn't hear footsteps. No door unlocking. Nothing. Just the quiet, unhurried way it swung, like it had been waiting to be opened. The guy slid in without a word. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Pale face. Dark eyes. Hood pulled low, casting a shadow over his features. His hands rested on his lap, fingers long and still. Something about him made the small hairs on my arms prickle. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. You got a drop-off location? No response. He just lifted a hand, thin, almost bony, and pointed straight ahead. A weird cold settled in my gut. Most people at least mumbled something, even the drunk ones. I cleared my throat and shifted into drive, rolling forward, waiting for him to say something, to correct my course, but he never did. He just sat there, unmoving, as the car glided through the quiet streets. The city blurred past, vacant intersections, flickering neon signs, the occasional cat darting between parked cars. My mind kept trying to rationalize the unease curling around my ribs. Maybe he was just shy. Maybe he had a speech disorder. Maybe. I glanced at the mirror again. He was staring directly at me. Not at his phone, not out the window. Straight. At me. My fingers tightened on the wheel. You good, man? Nothing. His eyes, deep, sunken, unblinking, reflected the passing streetlights in tiny, shifting glimmers. I forced out a chuckle, trying to shake off the creeping dread. All right, strong silent type. No worries. My own voice sounded off in the empty car, swallowed too fast by the stillness. The further we drove, the stranger I felt. Like the air in the cab had changed, growing heavier, thick with something unseen. My pulse had picked up for no good reason, my hands clammy against the wheel. It was like I'd stepped into one of those old urban legends, the ones cabbies told over beers, laughing but not quite joking. The vanishing hitchhiker. The ghost passenger. I licked my lips, forcing my focus back on the road. Just a job. Just another ride. I'd drop him off, and that would be that. But then I saw where we were headed. The outskirts. The very edge of town, where the city bled into forgotten roads, where abandoned buildings slouched under the weight of decades. I hadn't been this way in ages. There was nothing out here anymore, just cracked pavement, skeletal trees, the kind of place where even the streetlights had given up. My throat felt tight. Hey, buddy, you sure about this? There's not much out here. Again, no answer. Just that hand lifting once more, pointing ahead. I swallowed hard, my foot easing up on the gas. The car slowed almost instinctively, as if it, too, wanted no part of this. The road stretched dark and empty before us, leading nowhere good. My stomach twisted. Something inside me screamed to turn around, to end this now. But I didn't. Because part of me needed to know where this was going. And a bigger part of me was afraid to see what would happen if I refused. I'd been working the night shift for years, driving passengers who were too drunk, too tired, or too damn lost to get home on their own. You see all kinds of people when the sun goes down, some normal, some weird, and some that make you rethink whether you even want to be on the road at that hour. That night, it was raining. Not the usual drizzle that makes the road slick, but a slow, steady rain that turned the windshield into a blurry mess, streetlights stretching into long, distorted streaks. I was exhausted, ready to end my shift, when a new ride request came through. The pin was dropped on a deserted street near the outskirts of town, just past an old industrial lot that had been shut down for years. I almost ignored it. The area was known for being sketchy, a place where people either did business they didn't want seen or just vanished into the dark. But my balance for the night was still short, and I hated ending a shift with numbers that didn't sit right. So, I accepted. Pulling up to the location, I saw a figure standing just beyond the reach of the streetlight. He wasn't waving, not even looking directly at me, just standing there like he had been waiting for something long before I arrived. I leaned over and unlocked the door. "You call a ride?" My voice sounded too loud in the silence. He moved then, stepping forward in a way that almost seemed hesitant. The door creaked as he slid into the back seat. I caught a glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, a pale face, sharp cheekbones, dark hoodie pulled over his head. His eyes, barely visible in the dim light, looked dull, like he hadn't slept in days. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. No answer. He simply lifted one hand and pointed forward, as if I should just start driving. I exhaled, forcing a chuckle. Not much of a talker, huh? Still, no response. Fine. I'd driven worse passengers, guys who reeked of booze and bad decisions, couples who fought so loudly I thought they'd rip each other apart right there in my car. A quiet one wasn't the worst thing that could happen. I put the car into drive, glancing at the app. Strangely, no destination was listed. Just a blank screen. I frowned, tapping the phone, but it was unresponsive, the app frozen. Glancing at the mirror again, I found him staring directly at me this time. My stomach nodded. "Look, buddy, I need an address or I can't take you anywhere." His lips barely moved when he finally spoke. Straight. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time. I swallowed hard and did what he said. The city lights faded in the distance as we moved deeper into the outskirts, the buildings thinning out, turning into empty lots and abandoned warehouses. The rain picked up, tapping against the roof like impatient fingers. Minutes passed. Then more. The road was dark, barely lit by the occasional flickering street lamp. Something about this entire ride felt wrong. I checked the mirror again. He wasn't looking at me anymore, just staring out the window at nothing. That was when I noticed it. The smell. It wasn't strong at first, but it crept in slowly, a damp, earthy scent, like wet leaves in something older, something stale. It reminded me of a basement that hadn't been opened in years. It coated the inside of my nose, made my stomach turn. I cleared my throat. "You sure we're going the right way?" No response. A low unease settled in my chest. I was about to insist that he give me a real address when I noticed the road ahead. It looked familiar. Too familiar. My grip on the wheel tightened. I knew this place. A sharp left turn. A faded road sign, half covered in rust. And up ahead, barely visible through the rain, an intersection. Memories slammed into me like a punch to the gut. A year ago, I had driven past this very spot after finishing my shift. There had been flashing police lights, shattered glass glistening on the asphalt, and the twisted wreckage of a car wrapped around a street lamp. The news had covered it the next morning. A young man, mid-20s, had lost control and crashed. No drugs, no alcohol, just a freak accident in the middle of the night. He had died instantly. My pulse hammered against my skull. I looked back at the mirror. The man in my backseat met my eyes. And I knew. The rain outside suddenly felt deafening, the sound swallowing the car whole. My hands were clammy against the wheel. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn the hell around, to get out of there. But I couldn't move. Because the moment I blinked, the back seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding against the wet pavement. My breath came in ragged gasps as I twisted around. The door had never opened. There was no sound, no movement, nothing. But the seat wasn't empty. A deep impression sank into the fabric, as if something heavy had been sitting there just moments ago. Water pooled where his feet had been. The scent still lingered, thick and undeniable. My mouth went dry. The app on my phone flickered back to life. The screen showed the fare as completed. I turned back toward the road, and for a split second, just before I could blink again, I swore I saw him standing in the rain, staring at me from the exact spot where he had died 1 year ago. Then, he was gone. My body refused to move for what felt like hours, the cold creeping into my bones. When I finally forced myself to drive away, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I didn't sleep when I got home. And the next morning, when I checked the news, my stomach twisted into knots. Because there, staring back at me from the old accident report, was the face of the man who had ridden in my back seat. I didn't drive that night. I sat in my apartment, staring at the rain-streaked window, my mind replaying every second of the ride, every glance in the mirror, every shift in the air. I could still feel the dampness in the back seat, smell the stale, earthy scent lingering in my nostrils as if it had sunk into my skin. My phone sat on the table, the ride history open, showing a completed fare with no pickup time, no drop-off location, just a total charge of $0.00. My hands ached from clenching them too tight, my nails leaving crescent-shaped imprints on my palms. I told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the mind, the kind of thing that happens when you push yourself too hard, when the night warps reality and turns shadows into something more. But exhaustion doesn't leave footprints in the back seat. It doesn't leave the air thick with a scent that doesn't fade, no matter how many windows you roll down. It doesn't imprint itself into your bones the way that night did, making every hair on your body stand on end with a memory that refuses to settle. I spent the next day in a haze, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, something beyond just the horror of what I had witnessed. My rational mind tried to explain it away, to push it into the realm of coincidence, a bizarre moment of overlap between the living and the dead, a freak encounter with something that shouldn't exist but did. But the deeper part of me, the instinctual part, the part that had gripped the steering wheel in silent terror, knew the truth. That night, I sat in my car before my shift, hands resting on the wheel, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of the dashboard. The city outside was alive, neon signs flickering in puddles, the sounds of engines, laughter, and distant sirens filling the air. I had spent years driving these streets, years convincing myself that nothing in the night could surprise me anymore, that every strange, unsettling encounter could be explained, rationalized, brushed aside as just another oddity in the endless blur of passengers and forgotten conversations. But as I adjusted the mirror, my breath caught in my throat. The back seat was empty. Of course, it was. But the air felt different, heavier, as if something unseen had settled there, watching, waiting. My skin prickled with an undeniable certainty that I was not alone. I swallowed hard, reaching out with one unsteady hand, fingers brushing against the seat where he had been. It was dry now, but the memory of the wet fabric clung to my fingertips like a phantom sensation. I forced a deep breath, turned the ignition, and told myself I would drive. I would pick up passengers, make money, let the city swallow me in its usual way. But my finger hesitated over the app. The screen pulsed, waiting for me to go online, waiting for me to accept another ride, another destination, another faceless stranger sliding into the back seat. And for the first time since I had started this job, I was afraid of what I might find waiting for me. The rational part of me screamed to move on, to forget, to let the night dissolve into memory like every other long shift. But fear is not rational, and instinct is older than reason. I had driven ghosts before, in the form of exhausted men slumping into my car after too many drinks, in women who whispered into their phones as if they were confessing their sins, in people whose faces were etched with the kind of sorrow that made them seem less like passengers and more like remnants of something already lost. But this was different. This was not a ghost of memory or regret. This was something else entirely, something that had entered my car, sat behind me, and left an imprint in the world that could not be erased. And as the rain began to fall again, pattering against the windshield in the same slow rhythm as the night before, I knew, with a certainty that clenched around my throat like an unseen hand, that this was not over. Somewhere, in the darkness beyond the streetlights, beyond the edges of what my eyes could see and my mind could comprehend, he was still waiting.